r/AskReddit. What's the creepiest place you've been? Operating room for brain surgery. It's freezing cold. They wheel you up to the stainless steel bed with a cage you put your head in. They tighten down clamps on your head so it can't move. Then knock you out. You wake up multiple times over a 4.5-hour surgery, semi-conscious, eyes closed, but you can say "I hear you guys," or snap your fingers and hold a finger up like waiter, and the anesthesiologist hits you with a dose. After they're done, they poke a giant needle, ice pick, into different facial muscles to make sure they didn't break anything. Poking it into a muscle causes a subconscious flinching, and they look at the muscle group flinching to make sure each category is still rigged up. I had a bunch of scabs and taped cotton balls across my face and scalp. Then they seal up your skull and sign off on it. They use reciprocating saws and similar power tools to carpenters. It's morbid, terrifying, cold, but it can give you your life back. I spent 2 nights in the hospital and was driving to work 7 days later feeling like $1 million. The crypt, I think that's what it was, of a church in Bayeux, France. I was there on a school trip and we could choose whether to go to this historically old church or see the Bayeux tapestry. I chose the church. They had just found the crypt a couple of years before, so I was down there by myself, taking pictures, and after a couple of minutes I started feeling downright nauseous. Like, I'm going to get sick right here nauseous. Went upstairs to get some air, and the feeling went away instantly. Creeped me out, and when I went down with the group afterwards I felt totally fine. Edit, I was wrong about the crypt. The cathedral was built in the 11th century, but the crypt was only rediscovered in 1412. Here is a photo of the crypt, not mine, but it definitely was not all lit up. When I went lol it was very dark. More or less a combination of creepy and sad, but Cambodia. Went with family to see Angkor Wat. Huge temple, an absolute marvel, was featured in Tomb Raider I believe, and stopped in the town center for a bite, to eat with our guide. We wandered away from the guide just to explore a bit, and we were approached by a young girl, 15 to 16, carrying what looked to be a sleeping toddler. She asked us to buy milk for her baby and we obliged because hey, babies need food. Just as we were about to walk into the store our guide spots us and tells us to get in his car. We used it for transportation to and from a bunch of temples. The girl then starts screaming profanities at us and the guide, and we pile into our car. She started banging on the windows of the car while still screaming after the door was closed, and surprisingly enough the toddler still didn't wake up. We asked our guide WTF just happened, and he relayed this to us. Apparently in Cambodia and some other countries, gangs will profit off of not only sex trafficking from children, but also a form of pity trafficking. They will take a small child, toddler, and drug them so they look as though they are sleeping. They'll pass the child off to a young girl who will beg for food/money/etc and pose as the toddler's mother. Then, she'll pass the child off to a new girl who will repeat the act. They do this until the child wakes up, will feed them, and then start the process again. As the toddlers get older they'll be taught to try and sell things to tourists. If they fail to meet a quota they'll sometimes lose limbs, fingers, hands, arms, legs, and will then run a story about how they stepped on an old landmine. This is actually somewhat possible as the country is still reeling from the impact Pol Pot had, and there are still unearthed landmines. But the issue is that 1% are close to the main city/Angkor Wat, which is where a majority of these children were. We were shocked to say the least. This seemed kind of far-fetched, but what else would we believe? We did some research online and found stuff about the sex trafficking, but not much about the toddler swapping and child mutilation. When we went into town the next day with our guide, what did we see? The same toddler being passed to a different girl, still knocked out, still in the same clothing. Definitely creepy. I loved Angkor Wat and thought it was beautiful, but I don't plan on going back there anytime soon. I had a friend who cleaned out and sold foreclosed homes for a living. He once took me on a ride to a house he had to photograph for the bank after it had gone into foreclosure. From the moment we got there, it was unsettling. It was in the area of a ski resort, and the neighborhood was wealthy, but once we stepped inside, it was clear that it had been used as a kind of boarding house for resort staff. Numbers outside each of the bedroom doors, large closets/weird spaces turned into bedrooms. The place was filthy, with black garbage bags everywhere, pizza boxes, booze bottles, like clearly a party house for staff, but recently abandoned. At one point, I was on the ground floor, and my friend was in the basement, when I suddenly got full body chills. I was standing in the kitchen and there was a bathroom next to it with the door closed, and I somehow knew that there was someone hiding in that bathroom. At the very same instant, my friend called me down to the basement, where he had found a back corner which had been converted into another sleeping area. There was a television still on, just showing static, and a kitchen knife on a crate next to the mattress. That was the moment I stepped directly behind my 6 feet 4 inches, 300-pound friend, and told him we had to get the fuck out of there. I'm pretty sure the home was being used as an illegal boarding house for undocumented resort workers, and I honestly felt bad for the terrified kid who was still squatting in the basement, but I sure as hell didn't want to find him. In high school, my friends and I would go up to the local, abandoned state mental hospital to explore. The rooms were mostly creepy from the state of decay they were in. There was a lot of graffiti, with things like 666 and bands names, Tool, Marilyn Manson, spray painted on the walls. The graffiti wasn't creepy, just markings from other teenagers. Sometimes we would find bullet casings scattered on the floor. However, the creepiest area I saw were the underground tunnels. A security guard caught us on the property and told us to come back in a half hour after the state did their rounds. We met up with him, and he took us down into the tunnels that staff would have used to travel between buildings. I just remember how dark it was, and he was the only one with a flashlight, as that cell phones at this time were Nokia bricks. The other creepy part was when he drove us around the property in his Dodge Caravan that had his cat in it. Dry cat food was all over the floor. 16-year-old me was really stupid, hahaha. Even though nothing bad happened, it always sounds like the makings of a horror movie. Edit. This was at Metropolitan State Hospital, Met State, in Waltham, Massachusetts. Like many other old hospitals, it was torn down and turned into condos. Only an administrative building still exists. There is a little cemetery, Metfern, in the woods nearby where you can find the gravestones of the patients. They are only marked with C's and P's, Catholic/Protestant, and their patient numbers. I like to stop by every now and then to pay my respects. I have noticed that someone comes by, I assume on religious holidays, and leaves a flower on every grave. Forest Haven is an abandoned insane asylum in Maryland. It's posted no trespassing and technically patrolled by guards, but in reality is very easy to get into. I was there 2 weeks ago with my SO, exploring and taking photos. There are 22 buildings on the property, all just wide open and abandoned, covered in collapsed ceiling tiles, broken glass, and graffiti. There is still furniture in some of the rooms, and if you delve deep enough into the property, you can still find patient records that were left behind when they closed. We actually found a stack of patient files in a dark, windowless room. It was so surreal, reading about a severely mentally retarded man with a history of schizophrenia who talks incessantly. This patient had a 1-page handwritten summary for every year that he had been in the hospital, and they all started out the same. Kenny is an almost 45-year-old white male with severe mental retardation and a history of schizophrenia. He has been at Forest Haven for 5 years. Only the age and duration change from page to page. The first one is dated 1973, and the last page in his file is a printed memorial flyer showing he died in September of 1990. The facility was ordered to close in 1974, but didn't actually close its doors until 1991. In its last year of operation, there were 9 deaths at the asylum. Kenny was one of them. The creepiest part? The patient whose file I randomly opened up to, in the middle of a stack of wet, moldering files, sitting on the corner of a collapsing desk in an interior room of an abandoned basement. He shared the same first and middle name as my so. Just a weird creepy coincidence in a cold, wet creepy place. We are a Middle Eastern family. My dad left his home country and fled to Saudi Arabia to work there, went back after making some money, and got married in his home country, and went back to Saudi with his wife. My mom gave birth to her first son in the early 90s, and then they had another 3 kids in the late 90s. 3 sons and a daughter. I was the youngest. We lived in an annex, an apartment at the top of the building that takes around 25% of the roof of the building. The rest of the roof is a large area filled with TV satellites and other junkies. My parents were quite discreet about all the shady things that happened in that apartment until we grew up, and they became more open about it. The apartment had 3 bedrooms, a living room, 2 bathrooms, a very tiny wood-matic, and a small kitchen. This is a photo of the building. Squat. Back at the time, there wasn't another building behind ours, so it was just an empty land that led to a middle school. There's no major story here, it's just a bunch of creepy encounters that me and my family have witnessed, and I'll write them down with no order, but I'll start with mine, and then with the ones of my siblings, and then the ones with parents. I used to sleep in a bunk bed with my older brother being at the top until he asked me to switch with him, and I liked it at first, but then I realized my brother didn't switch with me for no reason. After a while, whenever we go to bed every night, around 11 PM, I keep hearing some noise on the ladder of the bed, like someone is climbing it. I never had the guts to look. Sometimes I would feel the presence and pressure of someone sitting on the bed too, but by then I've developed this technique where I would just cover my whole body with a blanket and force myself to sleep. I told my mom, and she was like, "There's nothing, just be a real man and sleep." I would also hear kids laugh in the living room, which is next to our bedroom, but I grew to ignore these voices and eventually it stopped bothering me. I remember a few nights where the neighbors would knock on our door at 3 AM and they'd ask my parents to not let us ride our bicycles in the roof because it's disturbing them. My parents apologized to them, even though we were all asleep and there was no one on the roof riding their bicycles. I knew there was something wrong with that place when I noticed that our bicycles were in different places in the roof the next morning, and there's no way anyone can go to the roof and play around cause the door was locked, and the only person who had the locks was my dad. My siblings knew about this too, but they didn't talk to me about it cause I was the youngest and they didn't want to scare me. We moved back to our home country because my dad wanted to start some business over there, and we stayed there for 3 years. That was when my dad decided we should go back to Saudi. It was so hard to find an apartment and our apartment has already been rented to a couple, but there was an empty apartment on the first floor in the same building, and my dad took it cause it was the closest to his workshop. I thought that this time it'll all be normal, but on the contrary, it was way much worse than that annex. After just 1 week, I woke up around 4 AM at the sound of Fajr prayer, sunrise prayer, and as soon as I opened my eye, there was someone sitting next to me, wearing worn out clothes with broken eyeglasses, and blood stains all over his shirt. He was rubbing his hands on my blanket. I looked at him and he smiled. That was the scariest moment in my whole life. I felt like I'm going to be killed or something. It wasn't sleep paralysis, cause believe me, I know the difference. I lied my head back, and I probably passed out till the next morning. When I told my mom, she said it's just a bad dream. Whatever, and no one at my school believed me. It was like a funny thing for them to do, to make me talk about what I've seen, just to laugh about it. The next day I woke up at the same exact time. This time there was no one on my bed, but I saw a guy wearing weird gothic kind of clothes, and he was next to my sister, playing with her hair. I haven't seen anything else after that one, but I always heard people talk in the room, more like hisses and whistles. Sometimes someone would breath in my ears while I'm asleep. Sometimes they'd take my pillow away, but that was it. They never truly hurt us. I find it fun to talk about it right now. My sister was friends, kind of, with our neighbor's daughter. She was with her in school. She told me some creepy things about their family. Things I haven't given much attention at the time because I was young, and I think they had something to do with all these shady things. They never closed their apartment door, it's always open. Always. My sister also told me that she once saw her friend bathing with her clothes on, and she always smelled so bad. She also told me that the bathroom lock would be unlocked in our apartment sometimes when she's showering. My oldest brother said that he would usually see my mom wandering in the house while he's pretty much sure that's asleep in the bedroom, and when he asked her she'd say that she was asleep. My other brother said that he once saw two shadows dancing on the wall in the living room. My mom opened up about it a few years ago and told me that sometimes she would check on us while we're asleep and then she'd see us playing in the living room at the same time. She also said that every couple of months she would ask my dad to buy new cups and glasses cause they would go missing for no reason. She said she never knew what was going on, neither did my dad, but they didn't want to acknowledge it to us cause they didn't want us to be afraid. My dad couldn't afford to move to another place. She also said that some of my sister's dolls would be scattered around the house sometimes. She told me that she once saw a man with a long beard in the corridor and that she ran to her bedroom and locked the door till my dad came back from work. She also told me that when she was at the hospital before giving birth to me, my dad woke up to another woman next to him. He said she kissed him and told him that she loves him. When my dad asked her who is she just left the room and he never saw her again. That's everything I can remember right now. We live in different countries now and we rarely meet, but when we do we talk about it and laugh as if it was a funny thing to talk about. We never knew what was happening, but it was quite an experience. Thanks for reading, I really appreciate it. My house. The guy who lived here last was super into DIY home renovation shit, except he wasn't very good at it. Our basement has 3 sections, one being regular basement with like a washing machine and a dryer and stuff. The second section is a little workshop area. When we toured the house there were a lot of studded collars in there. The third section is where shit gets terrifying. The guy who lived here last put a hot tub in the basement. There's already one on the deck, and he built a room underneath the deck and put in another hot tub. It didn't work very well because he was shit at building, and so it's a dark room painted all black with a hole in the middle where the hot tub was. There's mold growing everywhere. There are 3 doors that don't open, with what looks like small bones coming out from under. There's also a shower. Pretty sure this is where he kept his dead bodies. Also there's nearly 45 light switches in the house, half of which do absolutely nothing. Also all the walls are painted lime green. I have one more creepy thing. I live in a very sketchy town. When I was in middle school, my walk home took me through the roughest part of town. Boarded up houses, weed growing operations, crack houses, and constant fighting on the streets. The one house that I always walked by had always given off a really creepy vibe. The grass was always dead, windows broken, etc. One day when I walked past they had their curtains drawn back and there was a guillotine in the window. Like a full-sized guillotine with a blade and everything. Freaked me the fuck out. Edit. Alright, so a lot of you have been asking why I bought/live in this house. It's not technically my house per se, it's my dad's. I'm in high school and live with him. My dad bought it because it was cheap and there wasn't a lot on the market when he was looking. It's sort of his pet price to because he's a handy guy, installs kitchens for a living. The plan is to get rid of the whole third section of the basement. I went to an interview shortly out of grad school. I'm a librarian, and it was a cataloging job. It was located outside of a city, on a remote country road. There were no other buildings or houses located nearby. The address was a house. I was desperate enough to not turn around and drive away. I get up to the porch, and there was a very large dog waiting in the mudroom. I knocked on the door, and out comes this Norman Bates type, and he starts touring me around the main floor of the house, which is set up as an office, explaining to me that mother is a supervisor. Seriously, you can't fucking make this shit up. The place is musty and has a Bates Motel meets the office decor. By the time he takes me out the back deck to very rusty, dirty white antique deck furniture, I'm thinking WTAF am I doing here? Am I going to be murdered? And then he gives me a test for cataloging, the most normal thing so far, and once I finish it, explains Mother S rules. She's super strict about a lot of things, but especially the dog. No complaints about dog, ever. I go back through the house with him, and sure enough, there is a photo on the wall of Mr. Bates, TM, and Mother. I got the hell out of there, and ignored further emails from him. The moral of the story is that you shouldn't apply to random jobs without researching. Back during Vietnam, my unit got hit hard in the jungle. We split and one group went to help find the VC who attacked us. We stayed behind to evacuate the wounded. The 4 able-bodies were supposed to hop on with the injured and go. We load up, and one chopper doesn't make it back, so we 4 can't load. We would be grossly overweight. It's late, sun is low, pilot says he will drop these guys and come back for us. So we divvy up ammo from the wounded and squat in a open field. 20 minutes goes by, then an hour, 2 hours, it's now pitch black, and we're seated in a grassy field. We spent the whole night looking at every stick and leaf. THST twitched, you could feel the tension. We sat in a star back to back with our rifles pointed out. We knew we couldn't repel the attack, but we decided to take as many as we could before being overrun. If overrun, we would pull grenades and do every one, and the VC for 25 feet in every direction. The tension was thick. Sunrise, we heard the Huai come. On the way back he had a hydraulics issue. They worked all night to fix it so we could get flown out as soon as possible. All 4 dust-offs had issues and took bullets, so that is why the other one didn't return the first time. That field of grass was extremely spooky, even if it was just in our minds. I was working at Livingston Mall in New Jersey at Toysm in 2011/2012. This mall is dirty as fuck behind the scenes. It was supposed to be a mall for the rich, as Livingston is full of rich people, but no one came because they went to the vastly superior Short Hills Mall. Anyway, one of my things is exploring new places, and this was the first time I was able to explore this place. We had pallets that we needed to get rid of too, and my boss gave me the job of making them disappear. So anyway, one day I'm traversing the labyrinthine back halls of this place and I come upon a door that seems to be in a weird place. I open it up and peek inside, and it's like a 3x11 foot mini hall, maybe a bit longer. In it is a long series of shelves with nothing on it, and it seems like this may have been pet of something at some point. There's leaves on the ground, roaches both living and dead on the shelves and floor, and a set of overhanging tube lights that had at best 3 semi-functional bulbs, casting a pale eerie glow from them. Of that, there's chains hanging off of them. This thing looked and seemed straight up out of a horror film. Amusingly, my boss, when I told him and showed him the place, said, "Why am I not surprised you found a place like this?" Because he knew I liked exploring, and it's just something I do. Never found out what the place was for, but it did make a good place to stow some wooden pallets. Personally, the Royal Derwent Hospital in New Norfolk, Tasmania. It's the old asylum, now derelict, partially burned, and partly destroyed by arson. It was the longest continuously operating mental health institution in Australia. I was allowed to go inside the high security and went on a university group, and it's truly disturbing. Super thick reinforced doors, small dark rooms with dirty walls, and thick glass windows with curved ledges, so you weren't able to sit on them. The rooms I went to overlooked the yard, which had what was called a ha-ha fence, a fence that looked short, but the ground sloped down towards, so it was much taller than it appears. The high security end is where people like Martin Byrant, the man who committed the Port Arthur massacre in 1996, would be held if the asylum was still operational today, and it shows. It's an entirely hopeless place to be inside. Given how mental health patients are treated in Australia now, it's pretty disturbing to see how things used to be and how bleak everything was. And the rotting and decrepit building really helps sell the illusion. The house we used to rent on the main road in our town. It's like one of the oldest roads in PA. Anyway, the whole house had this horrible sense of foreboding. It was especially worst on the second floor, the first room of the third floor, and in the servants' stairwell, back stairwell that leads to kitchen in old houses. We would frequently hear heavy footsteps climbing up the stairs and down the hallway. Sounded definitely like a man's footsteps. We would also hear children's laughter and toddler-like running footsteps. There was this horrible anticipatory feeling everyone got if ever they stood at the top of the stairs, as though someone was standing there behind them breathing down their necks. One night, while we were having a few drinks on the porch with a neighbor, I went inside to grab a snack and refresh my drink. I walked pretty quickly through the living room to the kitchen where I felt safer getting my food together. When I came back to the porch, my husband was up out of the seat he'd been sitting in, pacing and rubbing the back of his neck. He looked a little wild-eyed and was saying to our neighbor, "Are you sure you didn't hear anything?" Apparently shortly after I'd walked into the house he heard a voice that sounded like someone was pressed up against the open living room window whispering harshly right next to his ear. He said it was a man's voice, that it spoke absolutely clearly, but in some language he couldn't understand, and it sounded really angry. I still have never been somewhere in person that gave me the heebie-jeebies like that house. Not me, but my mom. When she was young she would have night terrors almost every night, that people were chasing her. When this would happen, her dream self would always run to a tiny door to get away from whatever was chasing her. This door was never anywhere specific in the dreams, and every time she would go in, the dream would end, or she would wake up, so she never knew what was behind it. She just knew it was a safe spot to get out of the dream. When she was pregnant with me and house hunting with my father, they were touring a house that supposedly gave her an eerie feeling the minute they walked in, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what was throwing her off. Eventually they got to looking at the attic. When she went up there, the first thing she noticed was a tiny door identical to the one in her childhood dream. Her safe place. She never knew what was behind that door as a kid, and she still doesn't to this day. She immediately decided this was not the house for her. I'm not sure why she never looked behind the door, but I know for sure if I was in her shoes, I would have. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.